I am uncertain if you can assist me with this. I have perused some of the stories on your website and believed it might be worth an attempt. For numerous years, I have been having an experience that is truly difficult to describe and quite unsettling. I reside in the northern part of Virginia, close to the border of Maryland, which is merely a few miles distant. My home is adjacent to an old Civil War battlefield where a significant number of soldiers lost their lives during the Battle of Ball's Bluff in 1861. My house, constructed around 2000, has consistently been plagued with peculiar events such as unexplained sounds, doors that open and close autonomously, and ghostly figures shifting around. At this juncture, we've pretty much accustomed ourselves to these regular oddities. The first instance that brought to my attention something unusual outside my house occurred when we installed a security camera that overlooked our backyard. This occurred approximately 3 years ago while examining footage after dark one evening. There seemed to be a tall, skeletal figure strolling through our yard from left to right across the display, from out of frame towards our shed adjacent. There are streetlights that illuminate most of our yard space, so it was bright enough to distinguish what appeared like an undead, decaying skeleton creature trudging along rather leisurely with arms oscillating back and forth as it walked. When we watched the video once more later, there didn't appear to be any doubt that it was genuine or counterfeit, as you could clearly discern its shape as well as some detail. The motion appeared fluid and natural, but certainly not natural considering what we were observing. I searched the internet afterwards for data on similar sightings, but came across nothing particular other than ghostly appearances linked with nearby fights. Following that, things got back to normal until the previous year, when odd lights started to show up all over our neighborhood during the early morning hours. It began to occur every few weeks, then escalated, and now they show up almost every night. Sometimes these orbs appear as if they are hovering above the ground, whereas at other times they seem to be at the level of a person strolling by. Their color is typically white, however, now and then they turn up red or greenish in color, although I think this might be because of atmospheric conditions. These orbs can move fairly swiftly and are frequently spotted darting through our gardens, up and down driveways, and alongside streets before they vanish behind trees or residences. I have attempted to capture these lights on my CCTV camera, but the footage appears highly pixelated, and you genuinely can't discern much detail. It's frustrating because I am aware that what we're observing is real, yet nobody else appears interested enough to examine more closely. This has turned into an obsession for me as well as for my family, who now all look forward to observing these lights each evening. We've even captured some video with our phones that appears better than any footage we got on the security camera. However, it's still not clear enough to prove anything. Since the time I first contacted you, we have had more strange experiences. Roughly 2 weeks ago, while reviewing video from our security camera, my wife noticed a large, dark figure moving through the yard from left to right across the screen. It was just after dusk and difficult to make out details, but it appeared to be an animal with antlers or horns on its head. The creature seemed very large and lumbered as it walked past. My wife commented that she had seen this entity multiple times in rapid succession over various nights before it vanished. Alert for details about cryptids in Virginia, I searched the internet and came across certain narratives regarding sightings of goatmen in remote areas spanning the state. However, I found no detailed information related specifically to Northern Virginia. Then, only last week, while we were resting on our front porch one evening at twilight, my son detected a diminutive, shadowy figure darting back and forth between two houses opposite ours. We observed this figure as it moved in an unpredictable manner and then abruptly sprung onto a branch in a tree which was approximately 8 feet above the ground. We were all startled when we realized that what we were seeing looked like a miniature version of what I described earlier. This little guy also had antlers sticking out from his shoulders. He sat there for a moment before jumping down and running into another neighbor's backyard. He then quickly reappeared running along their fence line before disappearing behind their shed. My son got up and ran over to where he thought he would emerge, but never saw him again. We are convinced that these creatures are real since all three of us have seen them at various times now. Any thoughts? I live in the area of the state of Virginia. My husband and I were driving to a family gathering at my parents' house when we observed something that thoroughly frightened us both. It was approximately 5:30 in the evening on a day obscured by clouds, preceded by some rainfall. We were traveling on Route 7 between Purcellville and Round Hill in Virginia. It is mostly open country out here, with plenty of farms. We turned around a bend in the road where there is a long straight path for several hundred yards ahead of you before it twists again towards the left. As we began down this part of the road, I spotted what looked like two figures standing close to the edge of the road. I could see that one figure was bigger than the other, but they seemed nearly human-like from what I could discern at first glance. Then, as we got closer, maybe within 50 feet or so, I realized that these things looked more like animals than people. The smaller figure turned away from us, but as we passed by them, my husband said, "What is that?" I turned around quickly and saw this undead, rotting skeletal creature looking right back at me. The thing was holding up its hand as if waving goodbye or something. My heart skipped a beat, then suddenly lunged towards our car with such speed. My husband swerved into oncoming traffic, trying to avoid hitting it while speeding up. We made eye contact again just before he swerved onto his side and disappeared behind some trees. As soon as he did, another identical creature jumped out in front of our car, causing my husband to slam on his brakes hard enough to send me flying forward into the dashboard. I heard him scream too, which terrified me even more because he never screams. When everything settled down, we continued driving without uttering a word until we reached my parents' house. However, once inside their home, all hell broke loose once I shared what had happened. At first, they did not believe us, but then noticed the deep scratch marks on the side of our car that we hadn't seen before. Then my father decided to call his friend, who is a local sheriff, and tell him what happened. He said that there have been similar reports over the years around this area, mostly from people driving alone late at night. So now I am scared to death about going anywhere after dark, particularly since it gets dark early during the winter months. We don't know if these creatures are real or some kind of hallucination caused by something else like drugs maybe. Either way, I never want to see them again. My sister and I were walking through the woods on a path in northern Virginia, near Bull Run. It was 1968. We had heard that there was a Civil War hospital nearby where wounded soldiers were treated. The trail went along an old stone wall, then down into a ravine, and back up again. We observed what seemed to be an object resting on top of the wall a little distance away from us, so we advanced nearer to identify what it could potentially be. As we moved closer, we recognized a deceased, decomposing-like creature lying there with its head angled towards us, almost as if it were observing us. Its frame appeared as though it had been rotting for several years, yet nevertheless, it looked alive as its skeleton was shifting with a slow rhythm similar to breathing. We shouted, retreated quickly from the forest, and disclosed the incident to our mother, who refused to accept our account. My father took his shotgun and went into the woods to check things out, but he came back later saying he hadn't seen anything. I am now wondering if this could have possibly been some kind of zombie or demon. I believe that this thing, whatever it may have been, was a supernatural entity. I deduce this from an indigenous legend that my sister and I had heard about the area where we encountered it. The local Native American tribes in the Northern Virginia area believed that there was a powerful demon living deep within the woods who would come out to hunt for victims. The legend said that he would capture his prey, then carry them off into the forest, where he would eat their flesh and drink their blood while they were still alive. My sister and I have always thought that what we saw must have been this demon creature from the Indian legends. I don't know if anyone else has ever seen anything like what we saw, but it was definitely not of this world. I have been meaning to write to you about an incident that happened back in 1976. It was the summer after my first year of college, and I was working as a delivery driver for a pizza place in Richmond, Virginia. One night, I had just delivered an order to this house near Mechanicsville, which is north of the city. The man who answered the door gave me a decent tip, so it put me in a good mood. As I was driving back, I saw this hitchhiker standing on the side of the road with his thumb sticking out. I pulled over, and he got into my car without saying anything other than thanks. The guy looked like he hadn't showered or changed clothes for weeks, but he didn't smell bad at all. Actually, kind of sweet smelling, if that makes any sense. We continued along until we reached Laburnum Avenue. That's when things started getting strange. It appeared that every vehicle around us began slowing down while moving from lane to lane in a random manner. People were blowing their horns constantly, while others were shouting offensive language at each other. As we continued along Laburnum Avenue, there were several intersections where cars would be halted at red lights, and they would start revving their engines before charging off once the light turned green. One particular intersection captured our attention because it appeared like there were two groups battling with each other on different sides of Laburnum Avenue, flinging punches and wrestling around. Another block farther down, there were 3 police cars halting the traffic while officers attempted to placate people by gesturing with their arms. After passing another intersection, everything suddenly returned to normal. The vehicles sped up again, as did mine. Once in downtown Richmond, near Capitol Square Park and St. Paul's Churchyard Cemetery, everything seemed quiet again. The hitchhiker told me to stop near the park, and he thanked me before getting out of my car. He didn't say anything else. I was confused by what had just happened, so I pulled over in a parking lot near City Hall and tried to make sense of it all. The entire episode seemed surreal, almost like a dream or something. After approximately 10 minutes, I initiated my vehicle and proceeded towards home with absolutely no additional problems. Since that particular night, I have never encountered anything like that ever again. I harbored a desire to disclose this story to someone for years, yet I remained uncertain about who would put faith in my words. I neglected to mention that upon the hitchhiker's initial entrance into my vehicle, his physical appearance was somewhat skeletal, appearing as if his flesh was absent in certain regions. It's hard to explain, almost like he had just come out of a crematorium or something, but once we started driving and I took notice of him again, it seemed that his appearance had changed to slightly more flesh on his body and a bit healthier looking. The entire episode lasted around 10 minutes or so from start to finish. Let me know if you need any other information. My experience took place in Virginia, in a small town called Leesburg. I was living with my boyfriend and his parents at the time. They lived out on an old farm that used to be a Civil War battleground, complete with trenches dug by soldiers during the war. I have always been sensitive to spirits, but I have never had anything quite like this happen before. One night, while we were all sitting around watching television in the living room, I looked over towards the kitchen and saw something standing there. It appeared to be about 6 feet tall and was extremely thin. Its skin appeared to be a grayish white or possibly a pale yellow. The thing that stood out most of all, however, was its eyes. They glowed red like fire embers burning through smoke. After seeing it for only a few seconds, it vanished into thin air right before my eyes. My first thought after it disappeared from view was, did anyone else see that? My subsequent thought, however, transpired as I discerned one of our cats gazing attentively at the spot where it had just been standing and then proceeding to bolt, frightened and rigid. I asked everyone if they had seen what I just did, but apparently no one else had witnessed what happened. As soon as possible afterwards, I moved upstairs and told them how scared I felt having seen whatever that thing might have been. Their response was nothing more than dismissive comments such as, "It is probably just your imagination," or "You must be tired." That is, until about 2 weeks later when my boyfriend's father saw something similar outside, walking near their pond early one morning. One day, not long after this incident occurred, he showed me an article from some newspaper dating back to the 1800s, talking about strange sightings occurring around Leesburg at night, claiming they were ghosts haunting people who lived here because the land where these homes now stand used to be part of a battlefield during the Civil War. Flash forward another couple of weeks. Late one evening, while we were lying in bed, my boyfriend's mother suddenly woke up screaming. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that something had just attacked her. She said it looked like a skeleton, with bits of flesh still hanging from its bones, having seen nothing but the silhouette as it lunged at her. She then proceeded to tell us how, after seeing whatever this thing was, she felt like someone or something had been draining all energy out of her body for weeks leading up to now, feeling weak continuously no matter how much rest she received. This terrified both myself and my boyfriend since we had noticed changes in his mother's behavior recently, becoming more distant and less energetic than usually. Eventually, things began to improve for them though. One day, while doing some research online about hauntings around the Leesburg area, I discovered an article discussing about paranormal investigators who had been looking into claims made by people residing here experiencing strange sightings during the night. One woman they interviewed claimed to have witnessed the same type of creature I saw walking near their pond one evening. Another man mentioned similar experiences occurring when he lived nearby many years ago, stating, "I thought those days were behind us." He also added that every time he would see these things, he always felt the presence of other entities watching him too. Then there were others saying how they sometimes feel overwhelmed with a sense of dread whenever they approach certain areas around town or even just drive through the countryside alone late at night. The strangest part, however, is that no one really knows why any of these beings are here, exactly what they want from us. Are they ghosts trying to communicate a message somehow? Or maybe demons hell-bent on causing chaos in the living world? One theory suggests that there could be some sort of curse placed upon the land where these homes now stand, being built over an old battlefield. But honestly, I do not think anyone can say definitively what is going on unless they have actually experienced it firsthand, which most likely will never happen given the circumstances surrounding this whole ordeal. It turns out that there were several Civil War battles fought in and around the area. One of the major battles was the Battle of Ball's Bluff, which took place in October 1861 along the banks of the Potomac River near Leesburg. The battle resulted in heavy casualties on both sides, with many soldiers being killed or wounded. The bodies of these soldiers were buried quickly in mass graves or left unburied on the battlefield because of a lack of time and resources. Upon acquiring this information, it became clear why there would be such strong paranormal activity in the area. I additionally discovered that other people had reported similar sightings and experiences around Leesburg. There were narratives about shadow figures, odd lights, detached voices, and even encounters with what seemed to be Civil War soldiers. Some theories propose that these entities are lingering hauntings, imprints left behind by traumatic events from the past. Other theories believe they are intelligent spirits who are still trapped in this realm for some reason. It's difficult to say precisely what we encountered that night, but based on our experience as well as reports from others, it seems likely that these entities are connected to the tragic events of the war. One fact is for certain: it was an incredibly terrifying experience, and it remains unforgettable for me. Thank you again for allowing me to share my story. I have an extremely long story to tell you. A few years ago, my mother and stepfather left the city and moved into a large house on 30 acres in the country in Virginia. The property was largely made up of forest, featuring a small field in front. My mom would always see strange things at night while walking her dog. She saw weird eyes glowing in the trees or tall shadowy figures running around through them. They live about 20 minutes away from civilization, so they don't really have any neighbors except for one family that lives down the road. The people who lived there before us were apparently Satanists, and we found pentagrams drawn all over our basement walls when we first moved in. A couple of months after relocating there, my brother and I ventured outside one evening because he wanted to reveal something he had discovered by their pond earlier that day. It appeared to be some sort of massive tooth, though we were uncertain which animal it had belonged to. The sun had recently descended, hence it was not utterly dark yet. However, one could still clearly see the stars. We heard hefty footsteps originating from somewhere behind us towards where our backyard concluded, and we turned around to investigate. We didn't observe anything, however, so we resumed our conversation about whatever else we had been discussing before the interruption. When we continued our conversation, the face of my brother became pale as a ghost. He directed his finger towards what appeared like thin air very near to us, saying, "Look, look." I asked him, "What? What are you looking at?" He replied, "There's someone standing right there," pointing his finger directly at whatever he was seeing. At this point, I'm thinking he's trying to scare me or mess with me somehow. I told him that if anyone was actually standing right next to us, then why didn't he say something to them? So he did. He said, "Hey, who are you?" After a couple of seconds of silence, my brother started panicking, saying, oh shoot, it's coming at us." I'm still looking around trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And then I heard a low growl come from where he was pointing. That made me turn back towards him immediately, and I saw whatever it was lunging at my brother. It knocked him over onto his ass, but didn't attack him any further than that. I grabbed my brother by his arm, and we ran as fast as we could back into our house. Once inside, both of us were entirely silent for about 10 minutes, until finally one of us spoke up, questioning the other if they had just witnessed what happened. After confirming with each other that we both observed this entity leap at my brother without actually making an attack. It seemed like its intention was to frighten more than anything else. We ascended and locked ourselves in our room. The rest of the night carried on without any events until it was time to sleep. Neither one of us had a sound sleep that night. Since this incident, my fixation has grown on discovering what assaulted my brother that night. So whenever I visit home, which isn't often anymore due to my full-time job in Virginia Beach, these visits occur because my parents now reside in Georgia. It was on the night of February 7th, 2015. The full moon had just risen above the tree line when I first saw it standing there in front of me. It looked like a rotting, skeletal werewolf-looking creature that was about as tall as me. Its fur seemed to be falling off, and its skin appeared gray with black spots all over it. The head was large and misshapen, with long ears sticking out from both sides, almost resembling those of a bat. Its mouth hung open, showing sharp yellow teeth, while its eyes were glowing bright red. It had arms that reached down past its knees, ending in long clawed fingers. I immediately grabbed my phone out of my pocket to take a picture. But before I could get one good shot off, it turned around and ran away into the trees behind our house. When I told my mom what happened, she didn't believe me at first until I showed her some pictures online that people had taken of similar creatures that looked exactly like what we saw. The experience has affected us greatly ever since then, because now we're constantly on edge whenever we go outside after dark, or even during daylight hours sometimes too. I do not know if this thing is supernatural or not, but whatever it is, no one should ever have to deal with something like this, attacking them or their family members without knowing why. It seems like no one else really believes us, so maybe they are right. Maybe we did imagine everything. Maybe it never actually happened at all. When we relocated to the house, pentagrams were sketched all over the basement walls. The past owners of the property seemed to have been involved in Satanism, which led us to suspect they might have opened a passage or similar that enabled whatever assaulted my brother to enter. I also felt the need to add that prior to our first encounter, there was perpetually an unnerving sensation when stepping out at night. It was as though something was observing you from the midst of the trees, but glowing eyes were the only signs of presence we could ever detect. Regarding what it actually is, I do not know if it's supernatural or not, but based on other people's experiences with similar beings, I would say it's probably some sort of demon. My mother did research online after our encounter and discovered skinwalkers, which seem pretty similar in description, except they're allegedly Native American shapeshifters. I do not know if any Native Americans lived around here though, so maybe it was just a coincidence. Regardless, I still bring my camera with me every time I visit home, just in case something happens again. Because even though nobody else believes us, we know what we saw happened, and it was not at all a dream, hallucination, or anything like that. The creature has haunted our dreams ever since then as well, because sometimes when we close our eyes at night, all we can visualize are those bright red eyes looking back at us. Perhaps one day someone will finally capture evidence of these entities on film, so people cease assuming everyone who alleges to have witnessed them is insane. This is a very long story, so please bear with me and read the whole thing. It happened when I was about 14 years old, back in the summer of 2010. I live in Northern Virginia, but my family has a vacation house on Smith Mountain Lake in Southern Virginia. We have had it for over 20 years, and I've been going there every summer since before I can remember. The area around SML is heavily wooded and hilly or mountainous. There are lots of deer that roam around, as well as other wildlife such as black bears and bobcats. My dad told me once he saw a cougar up on one of the mountain roads while driving to our house, which isn't too far from his spot. So anyway, this happened in late July or early August, after we got back from dinner at some local restaurant by boat, which we do often because it's more fun than driving all the way into town. After eating out, we usually take a short ride around parts of the lake just to look at stuff until it gets dark. This particular night had clear skies, so you could see everything really well, even though there wasn't much moonlight yet, being that it was still somewhat light out. We were cruising along near an area called R19, if anyone knows SML pretty well. If not, basically, R19 is kind of across from Mitchell Point, where they hold the Great American 4th of July fireworks show each year. Anyways, as we're slowly riding along enjoying ourselves, my mom, who's sitting towards the front, starts freaking out and pointing off towards the shore, saying, "What is that?" and trying to get our kids' attention, so naturally everyone looks. It took me a second or two because she pointed almost straight ahead instead of directly left, where the shore actually was, but once I saw it, I could make out a large figure standing on two legs by the tree line about 50 to 60 feet from the shore. The thing was easily over 7 feet tall and dark brown or black in color, with long hair all over its body. It had a huge head with pointy ears and an elongated snout muzzle area like a dog or wolf, but it definitely wasn't either of those things. The thing also appeared to have massive arms and hands hanging down almost to its knees, which were bent forward as if leaning towards us slightly. Now, when my mom first pointed this thing out, she screamed, "Bigfoot!" So we kids just started laughing because none of us believed her, including myself at the time. Then, my dad, who was driving, stopped the boat, saying he wanted to see for himself what everyone else was looking at. Once he finally saw it, though, his face went pale white, and he said, "That's no Bigfoot." My dad has always been one of those skeptical types who needs physical proof before believing anything, so his reaction like that really scared me. I remember asking him, "What do you think it is then?" And his response still haunts me today. He said, "I don't know exactly, but I've heard stories around here about some kind of monster living up in these woods, thinking this thing might come swim out into the water where our boat is." So anyways, as we're sitting there watching this creature not moving much, besides swaying back and forth slowly, sort of rocking side to side while making these low growling noises, another smaller figure comes walking up behind the bigger one. This second creature appeared to be similar in shape and size, only shorter, maybe 6 feet tall instead. We didn't get a good look at this new arrival because it was still light out and they were standing in the tree-line shadows. It seemed to be a little more active than the other one, moving around almost like pacing back and forth. However, we couldn't see much else besides its outline, really due to poor lighting conditions. As time went on, both of these things eventually walked off deeper into the woods, but not before letting out these high-pitched screeching sounds that made our ears hurt. Once they disappeared, my dad quickly started up the boat engine and took us home without saying another word about what just happened. The next day, I asked him if he believed those things were real or not, and all he said was yes. So now I'm scared even more, thinking we're going to get eaten by some kind of monster while staying at SML House. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened during the rest of my vacation there, but every night after dinner ride, me and my sister would keep an eye out for anything weird near shore. That's pretty much the end of the story, except to say none of us told anyone else about this experience until years later, when I brought it up with Mom, who confirmed everything exactly as remembered. It looked like a giant, hair-covered monster. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, though, because it was still too light out and they were standing in the shadows of the trees, so we didn't get a great look at them. I think about this experience often and how lucky we are to have made it back home safely that night. It's also made me question things more than I used to, especially when it comes to the supernatural or unexplained events or creatures living among us today. My dad always told me there was no such thing as a monster, but now he believes differently since seeing those things on SML that night. He says they could be some kind of undiscovered animal species, or maybe even something supernatural, which scares him more than anything else. Thankfully, nothing bad ever happened during the rest of my vacation there, but every night after dinner ride, my sister and I would keep an eye out for anything weird near the shore.